I learned the hard way that fighting an HOA Karen in the dead of a Wisconsin winter requires patience, strategy, and an iron will to watch someone suffer the consequences of their own arrogance. My name is Samuel Barnes, and I had been living peacefully in my ranch-style home in Cedar Ridge, a small subdivision just outside Madison, Wisconsin, for about 3 years before the nightmare began. I worked from home as a software consultant, which meant I was there most days, watching the neighborhood drama unfold from my home office window. The place was quiet, mostly young families and retirees who kept to themselves. That was until Brenda Morrison became the HOA president. Brenda was everything you would expect from the stereotype. Mid-40s, blonde highlights that screamed salon visit every 3 weeks, designer athleisure wear that she never actually exercised in, and a white SUV with those stupid stick-figure family decals. She had moved into the neighborhood about a year before taking over the HOA, and within months, she had transformed it from a laid-back community into her personal fiefdom. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in January. I had scheduled my annual heating oil delivery because my tank was running low. I heated my home with oil, which was common in older houses in the area, even though most of the newer construction had switched to natural gas. My house had been built in the 80s, and the oil furnace still worked perfectly fine, so I never bothered changing it. The delivery was supposed to happen between 8 and noon, and I had cleared my morning schedule to be home for it. At around 9:30, I heard shouting outside. I walked to my front window and saw Brenda standing in my driveway, arms crossed, facing down the oil delivery truck that had just pulled up. The driver, a heavy-set guy named Pete who I had seen a few times over the years, looked completely bewildered. I threw on my jacket and hurried outside. The January air hit me like a slap, maybe 15 degrees with a wind chill that made it feel like 0. The weather forecast had been screaming about a polar vortex coming through, with temperatures expected to drop below 0 for at least a week starting that weekend. "What seems to be the problem?" I asked, approaching them. Brenda whirled around, her face already red with what I assumed was either cold or rage, probably both. "Mr. Barnes, this truck is violating HOA regulations. Commercial vehicles are not permitted in residential driveways between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. on weekdays." I blinked at her. "Brenda, this is a delivery truck. How else am I supposed to get heating oil?" "You should have scheduled it for after 6 p.m. or on a weekend," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Pete spoke up from beside his truck. "Madam, we don't do residential deliveries after 6, and we are booked solid for the next 3 weekends. This gentleman has had this appointment scheduled for 2 months." "I don't care about your scheduling problems," Brenda snapped. "The rules are the rules. If this truck doesn't leave immediately, I will have it towed and I will fine Mr. Barnes $500 for the violation." I felt my temper rising but tried to keep my voice calm. "Brenda, be reasonable. I need this delivery. My tank is almost empty and there is a massive cold front coming this weekend." "Then you should have planned better," she said, pulling out her phone. "You have 2 minutes to move this truck or I am calling the towing company." Pete looked at me apologetically. "I am sorry, man. I cannot afford to have my truck towed. I have 3 more deliveries today." I wanted to argue more, but I could see Brenda already dialing. "It is fine, Pete. Just go." "I will figure something out." Pete climbed back into his truck, shaking his head. As he backed out of my driveway, Brenda turned to me with a smile that made my blood boil. "I am glad we could resolve this quickly," she said. "In the future, please familiarize yourself with the HOA handbook." This could have been avoided. When was this rule even implemented? I demanded. I have lived here for 3 years and never heard about it. It was passed at the last HOA meeting 3 months ago. All residents received an email notification, she said, turning to walk away. I never got any email, I called after her. She waved her hand dismissively without turning around. Not my problem. I went back inside, furious and freezing. I immediately checked my email, searching for anything from the HOA. Nothing. I checked my spam folder, my trash, everything. There was no email about any new rules. I pulled up the HOA handbook online and found that it had indeed been updated, but the update was dated just 2 weeks ago, not 3 months. Brenda was lying, and she had probably pushed through this rule specifically to mess with residents like me. I called Pete back and tried to reschedule, but he was right. They were completely booked for weeks. The heating oil company was a small operation, and with the cold snap coming, everyone was topping off their tanks. The earliest they could get to me was mid-February, which was over a month away. I explained my situation, and Pete said he would see if he could squeeze me in somewhere, but he made no promises. That evening, I checked my oil tank. I had less than a quarter tank left, maybe enough for a week and a half if I was conservative with the heat. The weather forecast was now showing the cold snap lasting at least 10 days, with temperatures not getting above 5 degrees during the day and dropping to 20 below at night. I would run out before the cold snap ended. I tried to think of alternatives. I looked into electric space heaters, but my house was over 2,000 square feet. There was no way space heaters would keep the whole place warm, and the electricity costs would be astronomical. I considered staying in a hotel, but that seemed ridiculous. Why should I have to leave my own home because of Brenda's power trip? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I decided to check if Brenda's rule was even legal. I spent the next few hours researching Wisconsin HOA laws and found something interesting. While HOAs could regulate certain things, they could not interfere with essential services, which included heating fuel delivery during winter months. There were specific state statutes about it, designed to prevent exactly this kind of situation. I printed out the relevant laws and went to bed that night planning my next move. The following morning, I walked over to Brenda's house, which was only 3 doors down from mine. She answered the door in her usual yoga pants and oversized sweater, holding a coffee mug that said, Queen Bee. "Samuel," she said, her tone making it clear I was unwelcome. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to discuss yesterday," I said, handing her the printouts. According to Wisconsin state law, HOAs cannot prevent delivery of essential heating fuel during winter months. Your rule is actually illegal. She barely glanced at the papers. "These laws don't apply to our HOA. We have special provisions." "What special provisions?" I asked. "That is HOA business, and since you have not attended a meeting in over a year, you would not know," she said. "I want to attend the next meeting and contest this rule," I said firmly. "The next meeting is not until March," she replied. "Then I want to call an emergency meeting. According to the HOA bylaws, any resident can request one if they get signatures from 20% of the homeowners." Her expression hardened. "Good luck with that, and until the rule is officially changed, it stands. If you try to have that truck come back, I will make good on my threat to fine you and have it towed." She closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, stunned by her sheer audacity, before walking back home. She was clearly on a power trip, and I realized that reasoning with her was pointless. I decided to go the official route. I printed up a petition explaining the situation and started going door to door in the neighborhood. Most of my neighbors were sympathetic. Several of them had their own horror stories about Brenda. She had fined one family for having their trash cans visible from the street for more than 2 hours after pickup. She had threatened another resident with legal action because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black. She had tried to ban children from playing basketball in their own driveways because the noise was disruptive. Within 2 days, I had signatures from 35 of the 87 homes in the subdivision, well over the 20% needed. I submitted the petition to the HOA board, which consisted of Brenda and 2 other members, Gary Chen and Martha Wexler. I sent it via certified mail and email to make sure there was a paper trail. Meanwhile, the cold snap was getting closer. It was now Thursday, and the temperature was supposed to start dropping Friday night. I turned my thermostat down to 62 degrees and wore layers inside my house, trying to conserve oil. I also started looking into Brenda's background, curious about what made her so aggressive. What I found was enlightening. Brenda had been the HOA president at her previous neighborhood in Janesville, about an hour away. I found old forum posts and local news articles about disputes there. Apparently, she had been so litigious and hostile that the other board members had voted her out, and shortly after, she had moved to Cedar Ridge. She had a pattern of using HOA rules as a weapon to control people. Friday afternoon, I received an email from Martha Wexler, one of the other board members. She said that they had received my petition and would schedule an emergency meeting for the following Wednesday. That was better than March, but it was still 5 days away. The cold snap would be in full effect by then, and I would likely be out of oil. That evening, the temperature started to drop. I checked my tank again and estimated I had maybe 5 or 6 days of oil left at my current usage. I kept my thermostat at 60, put on thermal underwear, and wrapped myself in blankets while I worked. It was uncomfortable but manageable. Saturday morning, I woke up to a temperature of -8 degrees outside. My house was holding at 60 inside, but I could feel the cold seeping in around the windows. I went outside to check the oil tank in the backyard and saw Brenda walking down the sidewalk, bundled up in an expensive-looking parka. She was heading toward her white SUV, which was running in her driveway, presumably to warm it up. "Cold enough for you," she called out cheerfully. I ignored her and went back inside. I was not going to give her the satisfaction of a response. Sunday was even colder. The thermometer hit -15. I was down to wearing everything I owned inside the house, and my thermostat was struggling to maintain even 58 degrees. I checked the tank again and realized I had maybe 3 days of oil left, 4 if I was lucky, and the temperature rose a bit. That afternoon, Gary Chen called me. He was the HOA treasurer and had always seemed like a reasonable guy. He sounded uncomfortable on the phone. "Samuel, I wanted to apologize," he said. "I did not know Brenda was enforcing that rule. Martha and I never agreed to it. She added it to the handbook without our approval. Can you override it?" I asked hopefully. "We are working on it, but it requires a majority board vote, and Brenda is fighting us. The emergency meeting Wednesday is the soonest we can officially do anything. I am really sorry." "Gary, I am going to run out of oil before Wednesday," I said. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. "Not unless you have a few hundred gallons of heating oil lying around," I said, trying to make a joke but failing. "I will see if I can get the meeting moved up," he promised. Monday morning, I woke up to my house at 54 degrees. The furnace was still running, but the extreme cold outside meant it could not keep up, even with oil in the tank. I checked outside and saw the temperature was -18 with a wind chill of -35. It was dangerous to be outside for more than a few minutes. I spent the day huddled under blankets, trying to work but mostly failing. My fingers were too cold to type effectively. I considered going to a hotel, but something stubborn in me refused. This was my house, and Brenda had no right to force me out of it. That evening, I noticed that Brenda's house was lit up like a Christmas tree, and I could see her moving around inside without even a sweater on. She clearly had her heat cranked up. I felt a surge of resentment. She was comfortable in her house while I was freezing in mine, all because of a petty power play. I went outside to check my oil tank one more time and noticed something interesting. Brenda also had an oil tank on the side of her house. I had never paid attention to it before, but there it was, painted white to match her siding. She heated with oil too. An idea started forming in my mind. It was petty, it was probably wrong, but I was too cold and too angry to care. Tuesday morning, I woke up to 50 degrees inside my house. I could see my breath. I knew I had maybe a day and a half of oil left, 2 days maximum. The emergency meeting was the next day, but even if they overturned Brenda's rule immediately, I would not be able to get a delivery until Thursday at the earliest, and that was assuming Pete could fit me in. I decided to check on how much oil Brenda had. I waited until mid-morning when I saw her SUV leave the driveway. She was probably going to the gym or to get her nails done or whatever it was she did all day. I walked over to her house, making sure no one was watching, and checked the gauge on her oil tank. She was at about a quarter tank, same as I had been before I started conserving. Given the size of her house, which was similar to mine, and the fact that she clearly was not conserving heat, I estimated she had maybe a week's worth of oil left. If the cold snap continued as forecasted, she would run out in about 7 to 9 days. The petty part of my brain immediately started calculating. If she ran out of oil, she would need a delivery. And if someone were to enforce that HOA rule she loved so much, she would not be able to get one during business hours. I walked back home and made a few phone calls. I called Pete at the oil company first and asked him a hypothetical question about scheduling deliveries. He confirmed that they were still booked solid through the week, and they only did residential deliveries during the day, never after 6 p.m. due to township regulations about commercial vehicle noise in residential areas. Then I called Martha Wexler and asked her about HOA rules enforcement. She told me, somewhat embarrassedly, that technically any board member could enforce the rules, though usually it was just the president who did so. She asked why I wanted to know, and I said I was just curious after all the drama with Brenda. The emergency meeting was scheduled for Wednesday at 7 p.m. at the community center. I spent Wednesday huddled in my house, which had dropped to 48 degrees. I was legitimately worried about my pipes freezing, so I kept the taps dripping and opened the cabinet doors under the sinks to let warm air circulate. I had maybe a few hours of oil left. At 6:45, I bundled up and walked to the community center. The cold was brutal, and the 5-minute walk left my face numb. Inside, about 30 residents had shown up, which was a huge turnout for an HOA meeting. Gary and Martha were there, along with Brenda, who sat at the front table with a smug expression. Martha called the meeting to order and explained that we were there to discuss the commercial vehicle rule. Several residents spoke up about their own issues with the rule, including a woman who had to reschedule a furniture delivery, and a man who had been threatened with a fine when a plumber's van was in his driveway for too long. I spoke about my situation, explaining that I was currently without heat because of the rule and that Wisconsin state law actually prohibited HOAs from interfering with essential heating fuel deliveries during winter months. I had brought copies of the statutes for everyone. Brenda tried to argue that the rule was necessary to maintain property values and that residents just needed to plan better. Her arguments fell flat, especially when several people pointed out that she had never actually notified residents about the rule before enforcing it. After about an hour of discussion, Gary made a motion to immediately suspend the commercial vehicle rule pending a full revision of the HOA regulations. Martha seconded it. The vote was 2-1, with Brenda being the only dissenting vote. The rule was suspended. I felt a wave of relief. I could finally get my delivery. I stepped outside during a break and called Pete, leaving a message that the HOA issue was resolved and asking if he could possibly fit me in the next day. When I came back inside, Brenda was standing near the door. "You think you have won," she said quietly, her eyes cold, "but I will find something else. I always do. Maybe you should focus less on making people miserable and more on being a decent human being," I replied, walking past her. I went home that night to a house that was now at 45 degrees. I piled every blanket I owned on my bed and slept in my winter coat. It was the most uncomfortable night of my life. Thursday morning, Pete called me back. He had good news and bad news. The good news was that he could fit me in for a delivery. The bad news was that it would not be until Friday morning because they had a broken truck and were running behind. I told him Friday was fine. I could make it one more day. I spent Thursday in what I can only describe as survival mode. My house was at 42 degrees. I was genuinely concerned about my health at this point. I wore every warm piece of clothing I owned and barely moved from under my blankets. I considered going to a hotel, but decided to tough it out for one more night. Friday morning could not come fast enough. When I heard Pete's truck pull up at 8:30 a.m., I almost cried with relief. The delivery took about 20 minutes, and the sound of oil flowing into my tank was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. Pete refused to take a tip, saying he felt awful about the whole situation. Within an hour, my furnace was roaring and the temperature started climbing. By noon, my house was back up to a comfortable 68 degrees. I took the longest, hottest shower of my life and finally felt human again. That afternoon, I was sitting at my computer, catching up on work when something occurred to me. I had been so focused on my own heating situation that I had almost forgotten about my plan regarding Brenda. I did some quick math. It was now Friday. Brenda had been at about a quarter tank on Tuesday. With the extreme cold continuing, and her keeping her house at what looked like 75 degrees, she probably had 3 or 4 days of oil left at most. I checked the weather forecast. The cold snap was supposed to continue through the weekend and into the following week. Brenda was going to run out of oil very soon, probably by Monday or Tuesday. I knew what I was thinking was petty and vindictive. But after spending the better part of a week freezing in my own home because of her, I felt absolutely no guilt about it. If she ran out of oil and called for a delivery, I was going to be there to enforce her precious HOA rule. Saturday passed quietly. The temperature outside was still below zero. I kept my house warm and comfortable and watched through my window as Brenda came and went, still seemingly unconcerned. Sunday was the same. I spent the weekend relaxing and recovering from my ordeal. Monday morning, I was watching from my office window when I saw an oil delivery truck pull up to Brenda's house around 9 a.m. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. I threw on my coat and hurried outside. The delivery driver, a young guy I did not recognize, was already getting out of his truck. Brenda was standing in her doorway, arms wrapped around herself. Even from a distance, I could see she looked cold. "Excuse me," I called out, walking up the driveway. "I am a member of the HOA board, and I need to inform you that commercial vehicles are not permitted in residential driveways during business hours." The driver looked confused. "But I am here to make a delivery." "I understand, but HOA rules prohibit this," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. "You will need to come back after 6 p.m. Brenda's face went pale, then red. "Samuel, do not you dare." "I am simply enforcing the HOA rules," I said, echoing her words from weeks ago. "The rules are the rules." "The board suspended that rule," she sputtered. "The board suspended it pending revision," I corrected. "But if you check the meeting minutes, you will see that Martha never filed the proper paperwork to make the suspension official. The rule is technically still in effect." This was actually true. I had checked the HOA records that morning and discovered that Martha, who was lovely but disorganized, had not yet filed the official documentation of the vote. The suspension was not legally binding until she did. The delivery driver looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, I do not want to be in the middle of this." "Then I suggest you leave," I said. "Miss Morrison can reschedule for after 6 p.m. "We do not do deliveries after 6, the driver said. "Not my problem," I replied, using Brenda's own words. The driver looked at Brenda apologetically. "I am sorry, madam. I cannot deal with HOA disputes. You will need to call the office to reschedule." He climbed back into his truck and drove away. Brenda turned to me, and I had never seen someone so angry. Her whole body was shaking. "You son of a, is there a problem?" I interrupted. "I am just following the rules you established. After all, you did say residents need to plan better." "I am going to have you removed from this neighborhood," she hissed. "I will make your life a living hell." "Pretty sure you already tried that," I said. "How much oil do you have left, by the way? It feels like it is going to be cold for at least another week." She slammed her door so hard I heard it from the driveway. I walked back to my warm house feeling a sense of satisfaction I probably should not have felt. Over the next few hours, I watched from my window. Brenda left her house twice, probably trying to find someone who would deliver to her. I knew she would not have any luck. The oil companies were still backed up, and none of them would risk getting involved in HOA drama. Tuesday morning, I saw Brenda loading suitcases into her SUV. She was clearly going somewhere, probably to stay with family or at a hotel. I felt a tiny pang of guilt, but then I remembered freezing in my own home at 42 degrees and the feeling disappeared. Around noon, Martha Wexler called me. "Samuel, what did you do?" she asked, and I could hear the distress in her voice. "I enforced the HOA rules," I said simply. "Brenda called me screaming about how you blocked her oil delivery. She says her house is below 50 degrees and she had to leave." "That is unfortunate," I said. "She really should have planned better." "Samuel, I know she deserves this, but we cannot actually enforce that rule." "It is illegal under state law," Martha said. "Then someone should probably file the paperwork to officially suspend it," I suggested. Martha was quiet for a moment. "You are right. I have been putting it off. I will file it today. But Samuel, Brenda is talking about suing you personally." "Let her try," I said. I was enforcing an HOA rule that was technically still in effect, a rule that she created and used against me. Any lawsuit would be laughed out of court. "Just be careful," Martha warned. "She is vindictive." "I have noticed," I said dryly. Wednesday morning, I received a certified letter from a law office in Madison. Brenda was indeed suing me for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interfering with her property rights. The letter demanded that I cease and desist from enforcing HOA rules and pay her $5,000 in damages. I called a lawyer friend of mine, David Patel, who specialized in property law. I explained the whole situation to him, and he actually laughed. "This is the most ridiculous lawsuit I have ever seen," he said. "She cannot sue you for enforcing HOA rules. especially rules she created. And given that she did the exact same thing to you first, she has no grounds for emotional distress. If anything, you have a better case against her." "I do not want to sue anyone," I said. "I just want to be left alone." "Let me draft a response to her lawyer," David said. "I will point out that she has no case and that if she continues, you will countersue for your own damages plus legal fees." "That sounds perfect," I said. Thursday afternoon, Martha called me again. "I just wanted to let you know that I filed all the paperwork to officially suspend the commercial vehicle rule. It is done. Also, Brenda has called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night. She is trying to have you fined for blocking her delivery." "Can she do that?" I asked. "She can try, but Gary and I outvote her. Do not worry." Friday evening, I attended the emergency board meeting. Only about 10 residents showed up, probably because we had just had a meeting the week before. Brenda was there, looking exhausted and angry. She was apparently staying at a hotel because her house was still too cold. She immediately launched into a tirade about how I had blocked her heating oil delivery and left her without heat. She demanded that the board fine me $5,000 and take disciplinary action. Gary let her finish, then calmly said, "Brenda, Samuel was enforcing the rule that you created. The rule that you used to block his delivery and left him without heat for over a week. If anyone should be fined, it should be you for creating an illegal rule in the first place." "I second that," Martha said. "I move that we fine Brenda Morrison $500 for implementing an unauthorized rule without board approval and causing harm to residents." Gary seconded the motion. The vote was 2-1, with Brenda obviously voting against. She was fined. Brenda stood up, her face purple with rage. "I resign from this board effective immediately. You people are impossible." She stormed out of the meeting. The room was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping. Soon, everyone was applauding. Brenda had been such a tyrant that people were genuinely thrilled she was stepping down. Martha looked relieved. "Well, I guess we will need to hold elections for a new president." "I nominate Gary," someone called out. "I second that," another person said. Gary looked surprised but pleased. "I would be honored." The meeting wrapped up shortly after. As I was leaving, several neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Brenda. One woman hugged me and said Brenda had made her life miserable for months over a garden gnome that was supposedly not in keeping with neighborhood aesthetics. I went home that night feeling vindicated. Brenda had learned that her own rules could be used against her, and the neighborhood was better off without her as president. The following week, I saw an oil truck at Brenda's house, this time with no interference. The temperature had finally started to rise, and the extreme cold snap was ending. The driver told me later that Brenda had scheduled the delivery, then stood in her driveway the entire time with her phone out, as if daring anyone to say something. No one did. Brenda avoided me completely after that. She would not even look in my direction when she saw me outside. I was fine with that arrangement. About 2 weeks after her resignation, Martha called with news. "You are not going to believe this," she said. "Brenda is moving." "What?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "She put her house on the market yesterday." "I guess she cannot handle living in a neighborhood where she is not in control." "Good riddance," I said. "There is more," Martha continued. "I was going through the HOA financial records, since I am now the treasurer, and I found some irregularities. It looks like Brenda was using HOA funds for personal expenses. Nothing huge, but probably a few $1,000s over the past year. I am going to bring it to the board, and we might have to involve law enforcement." "Wow," I said. "I mean, it does not surprise me, but wow." "Gary wants to file a police report. This is embezzlement, even if it is just a few $1,000s. It is about the principle. I agree, I said. She should not get away with it. The following week, Gary filed a police report with the Cedar Ridge Police Department. A detective came by to interview several board members and residents. I gave my statement about Brenda's behavior and the oil delivery incident, though I made it clear that I was not pursuing any personal charges. The investigation took about a month. During that time, Brenda's house sold surprisingly quickly, probably because she priced it to move fast. I learned through the neighborhood grapevine that she was moving to Arizona, as far away from Wisconsin winters as possible. In late March, just before she was scheduled to close on her house, the police arrested Brenda. The investigation had uncovered that she had embezzled over $8,000 from the HOA over the course of 18 months. She had been using the HOA debit card for personal purchases, including spa visits, restaurant meals, and even a weekend trip to Chicago. The charges were serious. Embezzlement of HOA funds was a felony in Wisconsin if the amount exceeded $2,500. Brenda tried to argue that she was entitled to reimbursement for HOA-related expenses, but she could not provide any documentation or justification for most of the charges. The case went before a judge in May. I attended the hearing, along with Gary, Martha, and several other residents. Brenda's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not interested in going easy on her. The judge ultimately sentenced Brenda to 1 year in jail, suspended pending 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and full restitution of the embezzled funds plus interest. She was also banned from serving on any HOA board in Wisconsin for 10 years. Brenda stood there in the courtroom, her face pale and drawn as the judge read the sentence. She had gone from being the tyrannical HOA president to a convicted felon in the span of a few months. I should have felt triumphant, but mostly I just felt tired. After the hearing, Gary, Martha, and I went to a coffee shop nearby. We sat there drinking our coffees, processing everything that had happened. I cannot believe it got this far, Martha said, shaking her head. I mean, I knew she was difficult, but embezzlement. Power corrupts, Gary said simply. She got so used to being in control that she thought she could do whatever she wanted. At least it is over, I said. The neighborhood can go back to being normal. Thanks to you, Gary said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. If you had not stood up to her, she would still be making everyone miserable. And still embezzling, Martha added. We clinked our cups together, and for the first time in months, I felt like things were actually going to be okay. Brenda's house closed in early June. A young couple with 2 kids moved in, and they were lovely. They actually introduced themselves to the neighbors and brought cookies, which was a nice change from Brenda's hostile attitude. Gary took over as HOA president, and his approach was completely different. He focused on actual community building rather than rule enforcement. He organized neighborhood barbecues, set up a community garden, and created a Facebook group where residents could communicate and help each other. The atmosphere in Cedar Ridge transformed almost overnight. I went back to my quiet life, working from home and enjoying my warm house. My oil furnace ran perfectly through the rest of the winter and into the spring. Every time I heard the furnace kick on, I felt a small sense of satisfaction, remembering how Brenda's petty rule had backfired on her so spectacularly. In August, I ran into Martha at the grocery store. She told me that Brenda had violated her probation by failing to complete her community service hours and had been ordered to serve 60 days in jail. Apparently, she thought she was too good for community service and had tried to get out of it. The judge had not been sympathetic. She never learns, Martha said, shaking her head. She still thinks the rules do not apply to her. Some people never do, I agreed. As fall approached and the weather started to cool down again, I scheduled my annual heating oil delivery. This time, Pete showed up on time, with no interference from anyone, and filled my tank without incident. As I watched the truck pull away, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. Brenda had tried to use her power to make my life difficult, all over a simple oil delivery. In her arrogance, she had forgotten that rules work both ways, and when you create weapons to use against others, those weapons can be turned back on you. She had ended up losing her position, her reputation, her home, and ultimately her freedom, all because she could not stand the idea of not being in control. I felt no real joy in her downfall. Mostly, I just felt relieved that she was gone and that the neighborhood was peaceful again. The whole experience had taught me valuable lessons about HOAs, about standing up to bullies, and about the importance of community. That winter was much milder than the previous one, but I made sure to keep my oil tank topped off just in case. I attended regular HOA meetings, not because I wanted power or control, but because I wanted to make sure that someone like Brenda never took over again. Gary was doing a great job as president, and the neighborhood was thriving under his leadership. One evening in December, I was sitting in my warm living room, watching the snow fall outside when my phone rang. It was Martha. "I just got the strangest call," she said. "Brenda's lawyer contacted me. Apparently, she has finished her jail sentence and her probation is almost up. She wanted to know if there was any way she could move back to Cedar Ridge." I almost laughed. "You are kidding." I wish I was. Her lawyer said she has learned her lesson and wants to make amends with the community. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him that the board cannot legally prevent someone from buying property in the neighborhood, but that she would not be welcome on the board or at HOA functions. He said he would relay the message." "You think she will actually come back?" I asked. "I doubt it," Martha said. "I think she is testing the waters, seeing if anyone here would accept her. When she realizes we would not, she will give up and stay wherever she is now." "Let us hope so," I said. "Brenda never did come back to Cedar Ridge." I heard through various sources that she ended up settling somewhere in Florida, as far from her Wisconsin mistakes as possible. The last I heard, she was working as a real estate agent and staying far away from any HOA involvement. Life in Cedar Ridge continued peacefully. The neighborhood became the kind of community it should have been all along, full of friendly neighbors who looked out for each other rather than trying to control each other. Kids played basketball in their driveways without fear of fines. People put out their trash cans without worrying about timing. Delivery trucks came and went without incident. I learned that sometimes the best revenge is not elaborate schemes or public humiliation, but simply holding people accountable to their own standards. Brenda had created a rule designed to make others suffer, and when that rule was applied to her with the same lack of mercy she had shown me, she could not handle it. The consequences that followed were entirely of her own making. As I sat in my warm house that winter, comfortable and content, I thought about how different things could have been if Brenda had just been reasonable that first day. If she had let Pete make the delivery, none of this would have happened. She would still be HOA president, still have her house, and still have her freedom. But her need for control and her inability to show basic human compassion had been her downfall. I finished my coffee and went back to my work, grateful for the warmth, the peace, and the lesson learned. Sometimes the coldest people end up facing the coldest consequences, and there is a certain poetic justice in that. The following spring, Gary announced he was stepping down as HOA president due to work commitments. Elections were held, and a retired teacher named Patricia Gaines won. She was wonderful, focusing on maintaining property values through positive community engagement rather than harsh enforcement. Under her leadership, Cedar Ridge continued to flourish. I eventually became friends with several of my neighbors, people I had never really talked to before the whole Brenda situation. We would have barbecues in the summer and help each other with yard work. It was the kind of neighborhood community that HOAs are supposed to foster, not destroy. Years later, when people asked me about my experience with HOA drama, I would tell them the story of Brenda and the oil delivery. It became a cautionary tale in the neighborhood, passed around as a reminder of what happens when power goes to someone's head. New residents would hear the story and shake their heads in disbelief. The most satisfying part was not that Brenda faced legal consequences, though she certainly deserved them. The most satisfying part was watching the neighborhood transform into something positive after her departure. It proved that one toxic person can poison an entire community, but removing that toxicity allows everyone to thrive. I still live in Cedar Ridge, in my house with its perfectly functioning oil furnace. Every winter, when Pete comes to fill my tank, we joke about that cold week and Brenda's stunned face when I turned her own rule against her. He always asks if I have had any more HOA trouble, and I am happy to tell him that those days are long behind us. The oil tank gauge on my property shows full, my house is warm, and my neighbors are friendly. In the end, that is all anyone really wants from their home and community. Brenda tried to take that away from me over something as petty as a delivery truck in a driveway, and she lost everything in the process. Looking back, I do not regret standing up to her, and I do not regret using her own rule against her. Some might call it petty revenge, but I call it poetic justice. She needed to experience exactly what she had put me through to understand how wrong her actions were. Whether she actually learned that lesson, I will never know. But I know that the residents of Cedar Ridge learned an important lesson about choosing leaders who serve the community rather than their own egos. The story ends not with triumph or celebration, but with the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved and a community healed. The coldest week of that winter had taught everyone involved valuable lessons about power, responsibility, and the importance of treating others with basic human decency. And on the rare occasions when I see an oil delivery truck in someone's driveway, I smile, knowing that no one will ever interfere with that essential service again, not in this neighborhood, not on my watch.